Every authentic emotion has a counterfeit, except for one. There's only one emotion that has no counterfeit, and that's peace. Every other authentic emotion, what I mean by authentic, is an emotion that takes you to the place you want to be, that brings you the joy, that helps you to progress in life. All of those emotions, they have counterfeits.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. We are excited to have our awesome guest, Curtis Morley, here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
It is going to be fun. We are going to learn some of Curtis's wisdom, which was probably learned through pain and joy throughout your life. But Curtis has some amazing experience and passions that we're going to learn about today and see where this goes.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So I met Curtis a few months ago, earlier this year, and he actually came to meet and talk to a group of men that I meet with, that I have for maybe 8 or so years. We get together once a month and we work on being better dads, being better men, being better humans, and we focus on different aspects of our lives, which include our temporal and relationships and intellectual and physical and spiritual goals in our lives and how we can improve that. And on one of these meetings that we had, it's kind of a mastermind group where we just try to lift each other up. One of the members of my group invited Curtis to join us. And rather than him leading a discussion, my friend invited Curtis to lead a discussion, which was amazing. So,
thanks, Randy.
Yeah. So Curtis, I would like to maybe give you a chance to give a quick kind of background introduction. And who in the heck are you?
I'm a human. I'm a regular guy that has gone through some really hard things. And through that, have figured out that every emotion every authentic emotion has a counterfeit, except for one. There's only one emotion that has no counterfeit, and that's peace. Every other authentic emotion, what I mean by authentic, is an emotion that takes you to the place you want to be, that brings you the joy, that helps you to progress in life. All of those emotions, they have counterfeits.
So there's authentic and counterfeit emotions. This is good. We're getting right into the meat of it. and this is what I love when I ask somebody to tell me a little bit about themselves and they just get right to the center, because it's a little bit kind of easy to say, well, what I do, but when somebody talks about who they are and what's meaningful to them. So I love it. So with that said, I'll kind of maybe probe you to talk about the story that's led you to where you are now,
yes.
and the passion that you're working on now, which is hopefully what the meat of our discussion is going to be about.
Yeah. So I noticed you've got a copy of the book over here. So I wrote The Entrepreneur's Paradox a couple of years ago, and most of my life I've been a businessman and entrepreneur, started several different companies, and I wrote The Entrepreneur's Paradox for 26-year-old me because I made all of the 16 pitfalls that are outlined in this book. And some of them I made 2 and 3 times just to make sure I got it, just to make sure that I was really familiar with that pitfall. And I wrote this book and it hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, which was really neat. And my publisher said, you know what, we need a 3-book series. Let's tap into this and let's do 2 more books. So I was writing the second book. So The Entrepreneur's Paradox is all of the pitfalls that every entrepreneur goes through. And I coach and mentor entrepreneurs as well. And so the second book was actually called The Timeline of Business. So as I coach entrepreneurs and as I help them go from basement to buyout, I've started to recognize patterns. Not only does everybody go through the same pitfalls, but they do it at the same time in their progression. As they're developing and growing as entrepreneurs, they actually do it at the same time. So it's fairly predictable. If you tell me where you're at in your own timeline, what pitfall you're experiencing, I can fairly accurately predict the future of what's coming next. And there's actually this timeline that lays out and says, okay, you're here at this point, get ready for this one and this one and this one, and these inflection points that either skyrocket the business or sink it. And those inflection points are so critical. And so there's this timeline that plays out with every entrepreneur. And I guess to get to the further point, how we get to counterfeit emotions, because that has nothing to do with the counterfeit emotions. And so about 5 years ago, I went through one of the hardest trials in my life. I went through a very difficult divorce. And even though it's been, one of the hardest things I've gone through, I'm incredibly grateful for it, because it has given me a chance to reevaluate me. It's given me a chance to say, who am I? Who do I really want to be? And look at some things that I had misconceptions of my entire life. And I know we're going to talk about a couple of those, but the one that really got me into thinking about this whole concept that there's such a thing as a counterfeit emotion was pain. Pain that I experienced at a whole new level. And this is going to sound odd, I know, but I'm actually really grateful for that pain because of what it helped me to do, what it helped me to become, what it helped me get rid of. And so as I was going through that and came up with the idea of counterfeit emotions a couple of years ago, and I apologize that I'm going to get emotional because it still hurts. One of my best friends all the way back from college, he took his life. His name was Jerry Williamson, and I think it's important to say his name. And I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that at all, because I truly believe if Jerry understood the difference between pain, the authentic emotion, and misery, as well as guilt, authentic, versus the counterfeit of shame, I think he'd still be here. And because of that, because I'm not okay with how he left this life, I said, I need to do something different. I called my publisher and I said, hey, I know I'm in the middle of writing this book, but can we push pause? I've got a much more important book to write. And they were wonderful, very supportive, and said, yeah, we'll support you in this. And so that's what I'm doing now, is writing a very different book than I ever expected, called Counterfeit Emotions.
And when you talked to your publisher at that time, did you have this book in mind? Were you already kind of working on the conceptualization of it? Or did you just feel, I need to pivot?
Both. Yeah. I'd been compiling the principles behind it. But yeah, when that happened with Jerry, that's when I said, I need to spend the rest of my life doing something very different.
So talk to us a little bit about counterfeit emotions. Elaborate on that, because for one, I have suicide in my family as well. And I don't know many people who are not impacted by that.
Yeah. And we all are, especially today. Based on the numbers from the CDC, right now in the history of America, we have the highest suicide rate that's ever been recorded, and higher than the Great Depression, higher than any other time. Today, we have the highest number of suicides. And like I said, I'm not okay with that. I am not okay with that. And there's something we can do. There is. And it starts here. It starts with our hearts. It starts with our emotions, and helping people understand that it's okay to feel. It's okay to feel. And during COVID, we were told, shut our doors, shut our businesses, shut our churches, cover our smile. We were told to cover our smile. And as we kept shutting all of these things and isolating, we were also shutting our hearts. And with COVID and the isolation, and with social media and all of the things that are going on today, we're at the highest suicide rates that we've ever seen.
Wow. I'm not okay with that either.
Good.
Yeah. And with that, I haven't known, well, what am I supposed to do about it? When I experienced, my sister's husband died by suicide.
So sorry.
And it was, for me, when you talk about, gratitude for the pain that you've suffered, and I don't talk about it a lot either. It's impacted my life because, one, I'm closer to my sister than I ever was growing up because of this experience. And that's a gift that he gave to me, but I would rather learn this another way. My perspective and outlook on life and what matters is very different than it was before I'd experienced this so close. So you've been able to take some of your experience and, I guess, observations and say, well, what can I do about it? So how have you been going about it?
Yeah. So writing the book, Counterfeit Emotions is one of those things. Along with that, myself and Christy Holt, a partner company that it's called Vibonics. It's an amazing company. They have a mobile app where you can speak into your phone and you can measure your own emotions. We've created a conference called Safe to Feel. Our next conference is actually going to be at UVU on January 20th, and it's specifically targeted to teens and young adults. We actually just did a workshop this last weekend at UVU. We called it the Safe to Feel workshop, and then we'll do the full conference in January. And it literally saved lives. There were 3 people that came up to us afterwards, and each individually. And one man came up and he said, "This morning I woke up and I said, today I'm going to take my life." And he's still here. And another lady was standing on a bridge the night before. She's still here. And so yeah, we are doing something. And the Safe to Feel conference, it's free for teens and young adults, and then $20 for parents. And the purpose is to let them know it's okay to open back up your heart, that it's okay to feel, it's okay to experience the pain, just like you talked about with your sister and your brother-in-law, that it's okay to feel those emotions, because we need to feel. We need to honor the pain. And I didn't understand that most of my life. I really didn't. I thought if there was pain, that meant something was bad. Either I'm bad, my decisions are bad, my environment's bad. There's bad. Just put that in quotes. There's bad if I'm feeling pain. And I was convinced that pain and joy were completely exclusive. That pain and joy and love couldn't exist at the same time. If you had pain, you didn't have joy. If you had love, you didn't have pain, right? You couldn't have them together. And it's such a misconception, because the truth is you can't have the counterfeit of pain. You can't have misery and joy together. Those are exclusive. You can have pain and joy in the same space, in the same time. You can have the exact same moment, feel extreme pain and extreme joy. And I know you're a marathoner as well as a cyclist, and you think about crossing the finish line.
Anyone that's run a marathon is no stranger to pain. Let's put it that way.
There's a lot of pain in a marathon, especially if you're trying for a certain time. There's a tremendous amount of pain. And you cross that finish line. I remember I did Big Cottonwood Canyon. This was my 3rd attempt to qualify for Boston. And the first 2 I didn't qualify. And I crossed the finish line several minutes ahead of the qualifying time. My legs burned, my lungs were on fire, and I was so stinking happy at that moment in time. And pain and joy can exist together. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you're going to go through pain and then after you can feel joy. But the truth is you can feel pain and joy at the same moment, not after. Not let's do this hard thing and suffer, misery, and then comes the joy. You can actually have them together in the same space, in the same time.
And so why is it, and this is where maybe you can explain to us how you came up with this concept of authentic and counterfeit emotions and what each of them does for you. And for example, pain and misery being opposite of each other.
Yeah.
Or counterfeit to the...
I'm glad you brought up that distinction, because when we're growing up, we're taught opposite emotions. We're taught on one end of the spectrum, love, don't hate. And it's really easy to see the opposite side, because there's the spectrum, and over here is love, over here is hate. Do this one, don't do that one. And what the damaging or the really destructive nature of counterfeit emotions is that they slide up right next to the original emotion. And they put on the clothing, they put on a mask, they masquerade as that emotion. And so it's easy to see this is love and this is hate, but what about this is love and this is lust? And where do you draw the distinction between the two? Because you can put your lips to someone else's lips in the spirit of unity. in the spirit of giving, in the spirit of togetherness, you can do that exact same action. There's no difference in action. Love and hate, they're totally opposite actions. Love and lust, the exact same action. You put your lips to someone else's lips in the spirit of taking, in the spirit of objectifying, in the spirit of your own personal gratification, not thinking of the other person. Same action. But the counterfeit says, I'm the emotion that you want to feel. And the truth is that counterfeit emotions create destructive patterns of disconnection in our lives. They disconnect us, every single one. If you look through the list, there's 32 dyads or pairings. You look through the list, every single counterfeit emotion disconnects. It either disconnects us from ourselves, disconnects us from others, disconnects us from God, or disconnects us from the truth. Every single one of them.
And this is the research and in the book and coaching and masterminds that you're working on is around this concept of these 32 dyads of authentic and counterfeit emotions. And what do we do about it? What are the tools that we can use to move from the counterfeit to the authentic?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you give us some teasers on maybe how we can do that? Because I think that's what we need.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing is understanding how to identify whether the emotion you're feeling is authentic or whether it's counterfeit. And there's four criteria to identify the type of emotion you're feeling. The first one is connection, just like we talked about. Connection to self, not the ego, not the titles, not the money or the fancy cars or whatever it is, or the accolades or the sports accomplishments, none of that. The connection with self. When you strip everything away, who is Randy inside? Who is Curtis? All of the authentic emotions connect to that person. That then they also connect to others. We talked a little bit about guilt and shame. Guilt is a really healthy, important emotion. If there's only 4 personality types that can't feel guilt. Guess what they are?
Narcissist. Yeah, you continue.
The sociopath, psychopath, and antisocial behavior disorder. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have guilt, we would all just be a bunch of narcissists and sociopaths, right? If we didn't feel that guilt. And if you think about where does guilt come from? Guilt is actually based in empathy. And the Old English word, if you look at the etymology of the word guilt, the Old English says it comes from gilden. And gilden means to repay or means to make whole. The feeling of guilt means I feel I need to make you whole. If I do something wrong to you, then the feeling of guilt says, hey, go make Randy whole. That's guilt. Shame. Shame is one of the most damaging emotions we can feel. If you look at the frequency, this was fascinating when I found the research on this. Every emotion has a frequency. And if you look at the frequency, apathy is right at the bottom. That's the lowest emotion you can feel before and in your life is apathy, where nothing matters. There's nothing good. Everything is just this darkness. And not too far above that is shame. But if you look at the frequency of guilt, because it's based in empathy, because it knows how it feels, let's say I punch you in the arm or whatever, I know how it feels to be punched in the arm. And that empathy says, I need to go make Randy whole. And so it's based in empathy. You look at the frequency, it's well above into the positive. There's negative emotions and positive emotions, and it is well into the positive because it's so critical in helping us move somewhere. And of all the dyads, of all the 32 dyads, there's only 2 authentic emotions that are not meant to be held. They're meant to be felt. And
can I guess what those are?
Yeah, please.
Is that pain and guilt?
Yes, that's exactly it.
When I love when you describe the difference between guilt and shame, and I think the first time that you explained this to me, I heard it and I'm like, this sounds right. This feels right, what you're teaching. And then when you said that guilt is a positive emotion, I thought, well, but I don't like feeling guilty. but what I in my mind, what I was thinking was guilt was shame. And so I think that this is a problem that I have, which I imagine many people do, is we use the word guilt when I should be using the word shame to distinguish what emotion am I actually feeling, and then I can do something about it.
Yeah.
Because shame is telling me that I'm no good, and then I go down this spiral of that's taken me nowhere.
Yeah.
But guilt, I love my wife enough that I feel guilty if I do something that hurts her, right?
Yeah.
That guilt stems from love, from empathy, like you described. And so that clicked in my brain when you said that. Now, practicing that is a whole other game.
Yeah.
So how do you teach people to work through these authentic and counterfeit emotion dyads?
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because they've started to change in the psychological world. They've started to change their thinking. And Brene Brown talks about this, as well as there's a study out of Switzerland specifically about shame. And that's not new. So shame has been studied over and over and over again. And they found that with shame, there's a direct correlation to addiction, to bullying, to drug use, to sexual promiscuity, and to suicide. There's a direct correlation. What is new is they did the same study with guilt. And most of the time in the past, they've been combined. Like it's such a good counterfeit that guilt and shame have actually been, like, you look at the studies and you look at the research and it says the guilt and shame study, they just lump them together. This is one of the first times they've separated it. And what they found was that people that feel guilt in a healthy way, actually, it has a reverse correlation. It's inverse of the drugs, the sex, all of the things all the vices. Guilt is actually the way out of addiction. Guilt is the way out of suicidal ideation. Shame is the way in. Guilt is the way out. It was fascinating when I found this research that it's such a critical emotion, because when we feel guilt, we take responsibility for us and we take responsibility for others. And you talked about that motion. So we got a little sidetracked. The first criteria to know if an emotion is authentic is connection to ourself and to others, to God, and finally the truth. That's so critical. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, my existence, my being here on earth is a mistake. And there, you see the difference. And so when we look at getting out of shame and into guilt, there's a model. So each one of the dyads have a model of how do I get out of the counterfeit and into the authentic. And actually, before we go there, let's finish the authentic criteria. So first is connection. So connection to self, others, God, and the truth. The second is direction. And you said it just perfectly, because all of the authentic emotions, every single one, they take us forward, they take us upward, or they bring us together. Those are the three directions that authentic emotions, they take us somewhere. The counterfeit emotions, there's only one direction. And I know you know this direction because you just said it.
It's just a perpetuating spiral downward or going nowhere.
Yeah, they spin on themselves. Shame has to have more shame to survive. Misery dies without more misery. You think about the common saying, no pain, no gain, right?
But misery loves company.
But misery loves company, exactly. No pain, no gain, because pain takes you somewhere. Pain moves you. Pain demands action. That's one of the beautiful things about pain, is it demands action. On the other hand, misery, it just spins. It spins on itself back to more misery. And, the world is against me. Oh, look what this person did to me. I put that in air quotes, to me. It just spins on itself. And that's why misery loves company, because if it doesn't have more of itself, if it doesn't have more misery and add that company to it, then it dies. It naturally will die if you don't add more misery to it. And so it's so sneaky in that way, because pain and misery, they feel like each other, right? Guilt and shame, they feel like each other. And being able to separate that out using the 4 criteria specifically is so critical.
Yeah, it sounds like that old story about the which wolf is going to survive, the one that you feed. You know the story I'm talking about.
Yes.
I wish I could tell the story beautifully right now, but that there is this old metaphorical story about which one's going to survive, and it's the one that you feed. So, are you going to feed the shame, or are you going to acknowledge the guilt and move forward? So, this is, I imagine, where the tools to handle each of these dyads comes in.
Yeah. And would it be okay if we just finish those
so
two criteria?
The criteria, there's connection to self, to others, to God, and
the truth. Yeah.
And
then direction. So where does this emotion take me? Pain takes me to gain. Guilt takes me to you because I hurt you. I punched you in the arm. So I cannot apologize without actually connecting with you. Right?
Guilt drives you towards that.
Yeah,
which is so interesting because I don't want to pull us too far off. We're heading somewhere, but that guilt pulls you toward something forward and upward, right? Where shame doesn't, and it pulls me forward to reconcile.
Yeah, exactly. So the first one is connection, then direction. The third one is motivation. What is the motivation behind this emotion? And if you look at all of the authentic emotions, the motivation is love and surrender. I'm doing this out of love versus counterfeits. The motivation for counterfeit emotions, fear, which is, so damaging, and control. Fear and control versus love and surrender. And that one, like each one by themselves, can identify whether you're in a counterfeit or an authentic emotion. And then you combine them all, and then it just becomes rock solid. It's really easy to understand. The final criteria. So I created them all as shuns. So connection, direction, motivation, and finally valuation. What does this emotion value me at and you? So is it, if you look at the authentics, the value it says is that my value is divine, that I have divine worth. No matter if I'm succeeding, if I'm winning, if I've got a cool car, if I have a fancy house, none of that matters. All of that strips away with the authentic because it says I'm divine. No matter what, I have divine worth. The counterfeits, they say, no, you're worthless and you're worth less, meaning let's start comparing. Randy looks like he's in better shape than you are. So you know what? You're worth less than Randy. And, this person has the coolest Tesla. So you're worth less than that. All of those things, the counterfeits value us as worthless, that we really don't deserve any of the blessings or any of the greatness that happens in life. And so those are the 4 criteria: connection, direction, motivation, and valuation. Understanding those 4 criteria can help us to instantly snap out of counterfeits and into authentic. And then once we understand the models, one masterclass that we're doing here in January is the nice versus kind masterclass. When I say this to people, they're like, wait a minute, nice is counterfeit? No, that's not right. I actually just had a conversation last week where somebody's like, no, I don't believe it. Nice is nice. And they didn't understand the difference between nice and kind. And there's this model of how to get out of the counterfeit and into the authentic for each one of the dyads. And so with nice versus kind, for example, I guess we have to dig in a little deeper now. With nice,
this one's fun. I've heard you tell some stories on the nice versus kind, and someone held you to the fire once when you were out on it doing a running clinic once.
Yes. So nice is inauthentic. Nice is not honest because I don't want to rock the boat, so I'm not going to speak what's inside of me. So it's not honest to me. It's not honest to you. It does it with a smile. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's got this wonderful smile. And I think that's important to identify that there are some really great aspects inside of nice, but nice by itself is actually very deceptive, very manipulative. And we think we want to be nice, but the truth is we need to be kind. And kind is very direct. It will have the hard conversation in love. It will, and that's critical, that piece on the end, in love. It's funny, I've done, I don't even know how many workshops and seminars now, and whenever I've done it for singles groups, there's always one person that's like, oh, good. Now I can tell off my ex. I don't have to be nice anymore. And I'm like, time out.
Not quite what you're going for.
That's the other side of the pendulum. And we want to find center, which center doesn't have the swings. Center doesn't go from nice to mean. Instead, it eliminates the swings. And at the bottom where you are centered, you're grounded. That's where kind lives. And so yeah.
And these principles are true. I've read a lot of books about this. Radical Candor addresses this. Crucial Conversations addresses this really well. What the difference between nice versus kind. And I think of it with my wife. We practice this quite often, where we have very direct conversations.
Very real.
I love real. That's a way better way to say it is. And we've stolen something from Brene Brown too. You addressed her, and she talks about these concepts too. Atlas of the Heart is very much this emotional evaluation and conversation. So Brene Brown always says something, the story in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife and I know if one of us says the story in my head, we know that we snap into this place of having a real conversation to gain understanding with each other. And every time during those conversations, it's not comfortable.
Yeah.
Because we're figuring out what's real. And that to me is being kind.
Yes.
Because we're wrestling with something. We're not having a shouting match.
Yeah.
But it's not comfortable.
Yeah.
But I love her enough to hear it or to tell her what's meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And it's very important that first comes from a place of love.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's the difference between kindness and love. If I didn't care about her, I wouldn't bother saying anything.
Yep. That's exactly it. And the other really key differentiation between nice and kind is courage. Nice is cowardly, and it does it with a smile.
Wow.
It does it with a smile. Kind takes courage, because you're going to upset the apple cart. You're going to rock the boat because you know it will help somebody. And the model in nice versus kind, step one is to know your boundaries. And people feel victimized all the time, that somebody took advantage of me. I had this conversation and they were just a bully, or in some way life is happening to them. I put that in air quotes again, to them. This happened to me, or they did this to me. And so they feel victimized. Knowing your boundaries is one of the healthiest things you can do. And I do this exercise a lot in my workshops and seminars, is I'll ask people, I say, who feels like they can accurately or articulately describe one of their boundaries? And the other day I had a room full of 30 people, and one person raised their hand. One.
I imagine that's pretty common.
It is. That's
you ask me,
the ratio.
Please don't ask that to me, because if you ask that to me right now, number one, I'm nervous because I'm in an interview, but two, it exposes that I haven't gone deep to define that potentially.
And most of us haven't, and I didn't. It took me till I was over 40 before I started learning these principles. And there's a saying that there are some that choose to be humble and some that are compelled to be humble. I got the compelled part. Oh boy, did I. And I didn't know these principles. And you look in the business world and you would think, oh, Curtis is this entrepreneur and all this success. He must be this really strong, bold guy. At home, I was the doormat. I was absolutely, and because I didn't know my boundaries. And so understanding what your boundaries are, meaning where do I end and you start? What is the furthest limit that I'm willing to go? That's my boundary. And one thing that's really important to know about boundaries, you can't set a boundary for someone else. And when I start teaching this, actually in the Nice versus Kind Masterclass coming up here in January, this is one principle that people have to go back to over and over again, because they want to say, my boundary is if you do something that I don't like, then I'm going to do this to you.
Is that pretty common when you ask people about their boundaries? Did people commonly describe it that way?
Yeah,
where it's on somebody else.
Yeah, this is my boundary for you, so I'm going to tell you where you can go. rather than telling you where I'm going to go. And you think about like what a common boundary is, a border of a country. Can you imagine if we just like, hey, Canada, we really like Calgary. We're just going to swoop up and we're going to change the boundary. We're going to make this boundary for you. That's reason for a war, right? And you can't make boundaries for other people. And to illustrate this really well, one of my personal boundaries is I will not engage in a destructive conversation. I will not engage in a conversation that has name calling, yelling, raised voices, manipulation, demeaning. I won't do it. And you notice I didn't say anything about another person in that. Is I won't engage in a destructive conversation. So if a conversation gets to that point, then very lovingly, I'll say, hey, I can tell that this conversation is actually causing a disconnection or a rift between us. And that's one of my boundaries. I'm not willing to engage in that. I would love to continue this conversation when we both feel we can do it in a place of peace and love and come to a common understanding. And then I step out. I don't say, you need to shut up. You need to stop being mean. You need to stop calling. No, it's me. I choose that I'm going to step back when this happens. And that word, when, is so critical with boundaries because it's easy to put an if instead of a when. So for me, when a conversation becomes destructive, I step out.
That's very intentional, deliberate decision-making on your part to decide your boundaries, how to articulate them, the language that you're using to describe that. And when you're in the heat of it, potentially, that you can use that productive language.
Yeah.
When instead of if, for example.
Yeah. Because if feels like an ultimatum.
Right.
If this conversation doesn't go well, then I'm going to run away. Yeah. That it feels like an ultimatum when you say if.
Yeah. And even you just describing that seems like that is not helping us come to a resolution.
Yeah.
With that simple 2-letter word.
Yeah.
I mean, you think 4-letter words are powerful? Let's make it more potent. Yeah. Reduce it down to 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very powerful. I'm going to practice using that.
Yeah. And the other thing that's critical about boundaries is that boundaries are communicated with action. They're not communicated with words. We can state boundaries, which is important, but going into that conversation, you don't preface the conversation with, when you get started, you're going to have this hard conversation. The very first thing you say, if this doesn't go bad, then I'm out, or if this doesn't go good, I'm out. So instead of doing that, you just engage in the conversation. And then when it gets to a point of being a destructive conversation, then that's when you say, I need to step back because I can see this is going to hurt our relationship rather than connect it and build it. And so the action is what communicates. And you think about with kids, how many times have you said, this is the last time I'm going to tell you to clean your room?
It's not.
This is the very last time.
Until the next one.
And then the next one. And then the next one. And 5 times later, we're like, why aren't they cleaning their room? Because we're communicating that our boundary can be pushed. Our boundary can slide. And understanding that healthy boundaries, especially for kids, actually there's multiple studies that setting and keeping, that's the key, setting and keeping very clear boundaries is a way that children identify safety, that they feel safe, they feel stable. And by letting boundaries slide, children actually develop a sense of instability and they develop fear because they don't know where the line is. If they can push you, then they're like, well, I don't know what is safe and what is not. I don't know where that line is. I don't know where my stability is.
Love that. I heard somebody else say recently to me that, one of the best ways you can honor and show love for someone is to be predictable.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially describing what you did is they can feel a predictable behavior of those boundaries and they feel safety within that.
Yeah.
But if you're erratic, there's no safety.
Yes. That's exactly it. Yeah. So going.
Yeah. So boundary, we've been going, I could go on this forever, but let's circle back. You said the the process to go through the nice versus kind, number one is know your boundaries.
Know your boundaries. Number two is listen and validate. And this is such a wonderful principle. And this is one of the ones that we really have to try hard at, because it's not in our nature. When somebody is upset or coming at us and they're putting on the boxing gloves and they're in the ring and they're just taunting us and like, get in the ring, let's go, punch, I punch you, you punch me, punch. That's very common to do. Stephen Covey says it really well, that most people listen to respond rather than to understand.
Seek to understand, not to be understood.
Seek first to understand and then to be understood. Yes. And we can listen and validate. And that's why I do 21 days in my masterclass, is because the 21 days that's how long it takes to create a habit. And we actually practice every single day these habits of, how do I get out of being nice and into being kind? And this is one of the key ones. Is step 2 in the model is listen and validate. And you think about, well, what about the emotional vampire? Or what about the bully? Or what about, these personality types where you don't want to validate their constant complaining or their gossip or their, vulgar derogatory terminology or words, or you don't want to validate that, and you don't have to. And that's the coolest thing about this model, is that you don't validate the complaint, you validate the person. Because anybody you can validate. You can validate them as a human going through a human experience. Even the complainer. Like the other day, there was someone and they were just going off about, can you believe what this person did? Oh, and it was very easy to see. They were trying to get me on the bandwagon and, okay, let's put on the boxing gloves together. Let's go beat them up verbally. Oh, this person, how horrible. Let me tell you how horrible this person is. That's not validating. That's actually creating a form of enmeshment, and very destructive. Instead, what I did when this person was like, oh, this person that, and I can't believe, and I'll just use fake names, but can you believe what Susie did? Oh, she's the worst. I can't believe what, and just over and over again said how bad Susie was. My response to that in a validating way was, I can see how hard that is for you. Notice I left Susie out of the picture. Susie didn't even come into.
You're acknowledging their feelings.
Yes.
The individual. This is so awesome. My wife and I went on this marriage relationship workshop with Matt Townsend. Do you know Matt Townsend?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And one of the things he talks about with validating is that you don't have to agree.
Yes.
When you're validating.
Yes. Yeah.
You're acknowledging what they are feeling or experiencing.
Yes.
You're not agreeing that Susie's a jerk.
Yeah. You don't.
You're saying it sounds like you're having a rough go of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this step is so beautiful because, just like you said, you see them. You see the person. In this case, that same person, they just kept, and it was so funny because this person has been a pretty chronic gossiper or chronic, this is the talk that she very typically says. And so when I said, oh, I can see how hard this is for you, she stopped and she looked at me with this queer look like, wait a minute, you're not jumping on the bandwagon and I don't even know what to do with this response. and so she continued. And then I said, oh, I can see how that is affecting you. That's got to be really hard. And again, she stops and she looks at me like, wait, this is not what people say when I complain. Why are you saying this? And then a third time. And when finally she realized that I was seeing her and I wasn't putting on the boxing gloves. I wasn't jumping in the ring and let's jump on the bandwagon and go beat up Susie verbally. No, it was, hey, you're human and I'm human and I can validate that all day long. I can validate that this is a hard experience for you. And she was actually speaking out of fear that, the third criteria is motivation. Is it fear and control? That's what she was speaking out of because she had been hurt. and she didn't know what to do with that pain. And so she was speaking out of fear. And to be able to get into her soul and say, oh, that does seem really hard. I didn't validate whether it was even true or not. I didn't validate that Susie's a jerk. I didn't validate any of that. I validated her as a person going through a very human experience. And so that's step 2.
And that does sound kind.
Yes, it's so kind. And nice will feel totally uncomfortable with the situation, but be like, oh, I can't believe Susie did that. That's nice because I want to placate you in your complaining. I want to, nice will jump on the bandwagon. And well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. So yeah, let's go bash Susie together. Right? That's nice. Kind? Kind says, I see you as a human. And guess what? At the same time, I see Susie as a human. And you know how people are talking about you by how they talk about others when they're with you. And so that person actually, when she finally saw that I was validating her as a person, she completely just melted. She just let go of all of it. And she's like, no one has ever talked to me like this. That was her response. And because she's a very bold, brash personality, and she just melted. And it was amazing. And so, yeah, step 2 is listen and validate. Step 3 is also a unique one that most people don't get into, and that's invite. Step 3 is invite. And the invite means I see a destructive behavior in your life, so I'm going to invite you out of the ring, out of the boxing ring, and into the yoga studio. And I'm terrible at yoga, by the way. I really need to be more limber. But instead of saying, I'm going to jump in the ring with you, I'm going to invite you out of the ring. And I'm going to invite you into a place of peace, of growth, of abundance, of safety. I'm going to invite you into that place. You're trying to get me into the ring, and it's so easy to slide between the ropes and put on the gloves and let's go toe to toe. 1 punch, 2 punch, let's do it. And instead, the alternative is, we think we either have to get in the ring or run out of the building. But right next to the ring is that little yoga studio. And the alternative is to invite them into that place. And once we do that, once we give them an invitation, step 4 says surrender. Surrender their choice. You invite them in, you give them the gift of that invitation. And then it's yours to surrender. It's like you can imagine, let's say, I give you this gift, and then instead of surrendering and saying, you get to do whatever you want, it's like I give this to you and I'm like, nope, taking it back. And I'm controlling this whole thing, It's that control is the opposite of surrender.
Yeah, I'm so glad that before I jumped in with the question, you said the 4th step, because I thought, well, what if they don't follow your invitation?
Yes.
Surrender's perfect because we cannot control somebody else's choice.
Absolutely. Yep. And nice guys and nice girls, they are of the belief that they can. Mm-hmm. Nice guys and nice girls, they say the phrase very often, and for your listeners, I'm going to ask them, do you say this phrase? I don't want to make you feel bad. I don't want to make you feel sad. I don't want to make you feel anything. I would say that all the time.
It assumes you have a lot of control.
Yeah, it means that I can make you feel. And the truth is, no one can make us feel anything except ourselves. And we have complete power over our own emotions. And we don't get to make anyone feel anyway. And other people are not responsible for our emotions either. And that's a critical piece of being kind, is understanding that we own our own emotions, that other people aren't responsible for ours and we're not responsible for theirs. They get to do whatever they want. And sometimes those invitations are uncomfortable. Oftentimes they're uncomfortable. And we need to surrender their decision and surrender their emotions. Let them feel. There's a whole module in the 21-day masterclass called emotion shielding, where we put up these shields of emotions, and it turns out that every emotion is a messenger. And if we see it as a messenger versus a dictator, our emotions are not dictators. Our emotions are messengers. Our emotions are gifts, even the hard ones. When we realize that, we stop emotion shielding. We stop saying, you know what, I'm going to put this umbrella up here and here comes the emotion and it's going to bounce right off. Instead of that, we pull that away. We let the emotion come in. If it's pain, it's really important to let it flow through us. And same thing with guilt, flow through us to action. And then we can have that gift. But so often we remove that gift from kids. We remove that gift from others. We remove that gift from employees because we don't want to make them feel bad. You know what? That's an important part of growth.
Allow people to feel.
Allow them to feel. And then instead of saying, I don't want to make you feel bad, so you're not going to be crying and I'll be uncomfortable when you're crying, instead we sit with them and we cry with them. We let them feel and then we feel with them. And we sit in that space together saying, yeah, you know what? I see you and this hurts. It hurts a lot. And I'm going to be here with you to help you sort through this hurt, help you sort through this pain. And that's one critical component of being kind, is that we let people feel, we help them process, we get them to the other side of that feeling so that it's not bottled up, it's not trapped inside. So important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you came back to allowing ourselves to feel. That's something you mentioned early on, and some of the lessons that you learned through feeling pain.
Yeah.
And how grateful you are. Of course, this is Sparks of Gratitude podcast. So, you know, what sparks gratitude in us, for me, a lot of times that is the lesson I've learned through something painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how grateful I am that I have the gift that came from that pain.
Yeah.
Right. It's easy to think I'm grateful for Diet Coke and indoor plumbing, and, you know, those are the easy, superficial things. But going through an exercise of acknowledging gratitude, once I go deep into the meaningful, is seeing gratitude through the challenges I face.
Yeah.
So in your life, talk to me about what has sparked gratitude through your experiences and emotions, particularly the challenging ones.
Yeah. This was also critical to the entire formation of the book and everything. I went to lunch with one of my dear friends. His name is Jesse Citrid. And it was right in the height of all of the pain of the divorce. And I was complaining. I was complaining to him. I was full on just like, oh, I can't believe this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and to me. And he stopped me in a very kind way. And he said, Curtis, can I share something with you? Notice the invitation. Can I share something with you? And I said, yeah. He goes, life doesn't happen to you. Life happens for you. And at first I was taken aback, like, wait a minute, didn't you hear me? All of these horrendous things are happening to me. And he said, no, they're happening for you. And it broke me out of this mindset, this victim mindset of, wow, does life happen for me? He said, all of these things are for your good. All of these things are for your good. The question is, how is this happening for you? And I was able to, with that conversation, start to realize there's a path out of victim and into victor. I can be a victor in my own life by practicing gratitude, by saying, okay, how is this happening for me? And there's actually, about a year and a half later, I realized there was a third step. You can go from victim to victor. And the final one is vessel. Instead of saying, how did this happen? Or why is this happening to me? We can say, how is this happening for me? And then finally we can say, how can this happen through me for the benefit of others? And that evolution of from victim to victor to vessel is really rooted in gratitude.
Well, I love that. And you've been clearly practicing moving up that ladder and becoming a vessel because you've built mastermind groups and platforms and models to help people work through this themselves, including myself. I benefited from that. And so I really appreciate that. So how can people find you and participate in some of what you offer?
Yeah, the best way is to go to counterfeitemotions.com, as well as on Facebook. If you do a search for Counterfeit Emotions, we have a very active Facebook group on that you can find out about the masterclasses, the 21-day masterclasses, as well. The Safe to Feel conference is on the website, Counterfeit Emotions. You can get early access to some of the chapters in the book and all sorts of fun. So yeah, go to counterfeitemotions.com or join the Facebook group, Counterfeit Emotions.
Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for everybody that's listening or watching. And I want to say for my part, and I'm sure for Curtis too, you matter. We love you. Life is difficult sometimes, but you matter. And we're so happy that you were able to share this with us today. Curtis, especially you, I can't wait to learn more what you have to share as this becomes more and more of a movement, but I appreciate what you've done.
Thanks so much, Rand.
Thanks.